The wind howled through the cracks in the old farmhouse, carrying with it the faint rustle of dry cornstalks and the low groan of the barn doors shifting on their hinges. 8-year-old Cain Mathews lay awake in his bed, eyes wide and fixed on the window that overlooked the new pumpkin patch. The moon hung full and pale over the land, silvering the field below. From his window he could see rows upon rows of pumpkins stretching out into the distance like orange lanterns scattered in the dark. But it wasn't the pumpkins that made his stomach twist with fear. It was the thing moving among them. Tall, thin, hunched over and eerie, its limbs too long, its movements slow and dragging, like something remembering how to walk. The moonlight caught on the shape of what looked like a hand, or maybe just fingers, creeping along the ground behind the last row of pumpkins. Cain's breath hitched. He'd seen it before. 3 nights in a row now, always at the same hour when the house had gone silent and the world outside felt too still. The first time, he'd told himself it was a deer. The second, maybe a neighbor. But now he knew better. The thing stopped, turned towards the house and went still. Even from his window, Cain could feel it, the weight of its attention. A prickling cold sensation that crawled across his skin. He ducked under his quilt, heart pounding so loud it filled his ears. He stayed there, clutching the covers tight, until the pale light of dawn crept across the floor. He'd never liked the place. Even when they first moved here, he'd had this bad feeling. The Mathews family had been farming for nearly a decade before they finally found their dream place, a wide stretch of fertile land just outside Hollow Creek. The house, though old, had strong bones and a wide porch overlooking a field that would soon be their new pumpkin patch. 20 acres, he'd said, grinning across the kitchen table at Tony. Rich soil, a real farmhouse, not bad for the price. Tony, always the practical one, raised an eyebrow. "There's a reason land that size is cheap, Andy." He only laughed. Superstitious nonsense. The last owner probably just got old. By the end of the month, the Mathews family, Andrew, Tony, and their only child, 8-year-old Cain, were unpacking boxes in their new home on the outskirts of Hollow Creek. The place was old but beautiful, creaking floors, wide windows, and a porch that looked out over endless rows of potential farmland. Andrew had plans, big ones, pumpkins, corn, maybe even sunflowers by spring. "We'll make the place shine again," he told Tony, pride swelling in his voice. Cain wasn't so sure. From the moment they'd arrived, he'd felt something strange about the land. The fields seemed too quiet, the scarecrow posts too empty. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, it carried a faint smell of something burnt, like old straw and smoke. Andrew Mathews stood at the edge of the back field on their first morning, hands on his hips, the wind carrying the faint scent of soil and rain. "It's perfect," he said. Tony smiled, her arm around little Cain, who clutched his favorite toy truck. It was while clearing the far side of the patch that they found it. A scarecrow, half collapsed against the weeds, its clothes tattered but its straw-stuffed face oddly intact. Its grin was sewn crookedly across burlap, and its button eyes, one black, one pale grey, seemed almost aware. "Creepy thing," Tony muttered. "Waste not," Andrew said with a grin. "We'll clean it up. Good for the pumpkins." That evening, he propped the scarecrow in the center of the patch. By the time the moon rose, its pale light washed over the field, and the scarecrow's head tilted ever so slightly toward the house. The first few weeks passed quietly. The farmhouse, though old, began to feel like home. Tony filled the kitchen with the smell of cinnamon and fresh bread, the kind that made the walls seem warmer. Andrew threw himself into work from dawn until dusk, his hands blistered and proud as he tilled and planted, speaking often about how this land was the start of something real. They planted corn, peas, potatoes, beans, and in the backfield a wide patch of pumpkins, Andrew's favorite. "Good soil here," he told Cain one morning, kneeling beside him as they buried seeds into the soft earth. "By Halloween, we'll have a patch the whole county will envy." Kane smiled faintly, but he didn't like that field much. The way it stretched so far back, how the tree line loomed dark and heavy at the far edge. It felt like something was watching from there. The scarecrow was creepy as well. Still, nothing strange happened. Not at first. They built a small chicken coop, painted it red. Tony started a garden behind the house, the air filled with the hum of crickets and the rustle of wind through tall grass. For a while, life felt simple again. Then the pumpkins began to sprout. Kane tried to be happy, he really did. The new house was bigger than their old one, and his bedroom window looked out over the pumpkin patch, a sea of dirt and green vines that would soon burst into color. But something about it all made his stomach twist. The nights felt different here. The wind didn't sound like wind, it moaned. The house creaked even when no one moved. And sometimes, when he woke in the small hours, he swore he heard footsteps outside, slow and heavy, dragging across the porch. He told himself it was just animals or the wind, but deep down he wasn't so sure. When the first pumpkin sprouts appeared, Andrew was overjoyed. "Look at that," he said, crouching in the soil and brushing his hand over the fuzzy green shoots. "Good soil, told you so." It was then that they noticed the scarecrow had fallen down. Andrew picked it straight up, brushing off some loose dirt. "There you go, old boy," he said, pushing the stake back into the ground. Kane stood back, watching. The scarecrow's head lolled to one side, the open eye fixed squarely on him. For a second, just a heartbeat, he thought he saw the stitched grin twitch, pulling tighter at the edges. He blinked, and it was still again. "There," Andrew said, brushing his hands together. "Old-fashioned charm never hurt anyone." But that night when the moon rose, it looked wrong. The scarecrow's shadow stretched long and thin across the field, its shape bending oddly against the vines. From his window, Kane watched the empty grin glowing faintly in the moonlight. It wasn't facing the road anymore, it was facing the house now. The next morning, Andrew was already out in the field when Kane woke. He ran outside barefoot, the morning dew soaking his pajamas. "Dad," he called, "the scarecrow moved." Andrew looked up from where he was checking the soil. "Moved? What do you mean, bud?" "It's turned. It was looking at the house last night." Andrew chuckled softly. "You've got an imagination, Kane. It's just the wind turning the post. These old ones aren't that solid." "But, hey," Andrew said gently, "you're fine. That scarecrow's just a bundle of straw and wood, nothing more." Kane didn't argue, but as he turned back toward the house, he noticed something odd. The dirt near the post looked disturbed, a shallow imprint, almost like a footprint. Too long, too narrow. He told himself it was a trick of the light, but it played on his mind. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Every morning, the scarecrow seemed to stand a little differently. Its hat might be slightly turned, one arm hung lower, or the tilt of its head just a bit more pronounced than he remembered. Once Kane saw it at the edge of the pumpkin rows, when he knew it had been in the middle the night before. Another time it seemed to be facing the chicken coop, then the house again. He stopped sleeping well when the night sounds grew louder. The low groan of wood, the whisper of something brushing against the walls, the soft rustle of straw in the still air. He tried telling his parents several times, but each time they brushed it off as shadows or wind. Tony noticed his tired eyes at breakfast one morning. "You're scaring yourself, sweetheart," she said kindly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "There's nothing out there." Kane wanted to believe her, he wanted to, but that night he woke to the faint creak of the back gate opening. Through the glass, silvered by moonlight, he saw it. A tall, thin shape standing not in the middle of the field now, but halfway between the pumpkins and the porch. Still silent, watching. He opened his window and popped out his head, the night chill hitting him hard. He whispered into the dark, voice trembling, "Dad, is that you?" No answer, only the sound of the wind, and far off in the field the faintest creak of wood, like something climbing down from its post. The figure suddenly dropped out of sight behind the fence. Kane's face drained of color. He whipped his head in, slammed the window shut, and was under the blanket quick as a flash, shaking like a leaf. He didn't dare to look again, and eventually fell asleep like that. The next morning dawned gold and soft, sunlight spilling over the fields like honey. But for Cain, the day already felt wrong. He hadn't slept more than an hour. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that tall figure in the field, motionless, but never still. At breakfast, the smell of bacon and coffee filled the kitchen, but Cain just pushed his eggs around the plate. His parents were talking about repairs, the fence near the coop, the loose hinge on the barn door, but he couldn't stand it anymore. "Head moved again last night," he blurted out. Andrew looked up from his mug. "What did, bud?" "The scarecrow," Cain said, voice shaking. "It was in the middle of the patch, and then it was closer to the porch. I saw it. It keeps moving." Tony sighed. "Cain, I'm not making it up." He butted in, his hands clenched into fists. "It's watching the house. Every night it's closer." Andrew's jaw tightened. He set down his coffee with a quiet clink. "That's enough, son. You've been working too hard helping me, that's all. It's just the wind. Maybe an animal knocked it a bit." "No, it's not an animal. It moves, Dad." The words burst out louder than he meant them to, echoing in the small kitchen. The chickens outside startled and began squawking. Tony stood, her voice gentle but firm. "Cain, that's enough. Go to your room until you calm down." Cain's chest heaved, anger and fear twisting together in his throat. "You never believe me," he muttered, pushing away from the table. Andrew's eyes softened a little, but his patience was thinning. "Tell you what," he said after a moment. "When you're ready, we'll go out and take a look together. You'll see it's fine. Maybe facing the wrong way, but that's all." Cain didn't answer. He stormed off down the hall, every floorboard creaking beneath his small bare feet. They would never believe him unless he could prove it. An hour later, Andrew called him out to the field. The pumpkins were thriving now, fat and orange, heavy on their vines. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of earth. The scarecrow stood tall among them, just where it always had, arms outstretched, head slightly tilted. Andrew placed a hand on Cain's shoulder. "See? Nothing wrong, still right where I left it." But even as he said it, Cain noticed something his father didn't. The faint drag marks right at the base of the post, as if the wooden stake had been pulled through the soil. Andrew sighed, pretending not to see Cain's expression. "Tell you what, I'll turn it around, that way it won't be looking at the house anymore, okay?" He stepped into the patch, boots crunching over vines, and gripped the scarecrow by its post. As he turned it, the burlap head lolled forward, the single grey button eye glinting dully in the light. There, facing the trees now. No more nightmares. Cain didn't reply. He couldn't look away from that crooked, stitched grin. As they walked back to the house, the wind picked up behind them, a long, hollow sigh through the field that almost sounded like laughter. Halloween was only 4 weeks away. He hoped then maybe they could take down that thing. That night, Cain tried not to look out the window. He lay in bed with the blanket pulled up to his chin, staring at the ceiling. The crickets outside sang loud, and the house creaked in the cooling air. He told himself not to check. Not again, but curiosity, or maybe fear, finally won. He turned his head slowly toward the window. The moon was bright, washing the field in silver. From here he could see the scarecrow clearly at the edge of the patch. It was facing away, just like his father had left it. Still, silent. Then, a few minutes later, it wasn't. It was closer, a few rows in. Cain blinked, heart thudding. He hadn't seen it move. He never saw it move. It was just there. He pushed the blanket aside and knelt on his bed to get a better look. The scarecrow stood still again. Another minute passed, and now it was nearer the middle of the field. He rubbed his eyes, breath fogging the glass. It didn't make sense. Each time he looked away, and even for a second, it seemed to have changed places. Moving, not moving, but always closer. Finally, when it was just a few feet from the edge of the yard, he could see it. Cain froze. The stitched grin gleamed faintly under the moonlight. He dropped beneath the blanket, pulling it over his head, holding his breath. The silence stretched long and thin. Then came the sound. A soft scrape, like straw and fingernails dragging across glass. Once, Twice, right outside his window. Cain clutched the blanket tighter, his heart hammering in his chest. He wanted to scream, to run for his parents, but fear held him down, heavy and suffocating. Then the scraping stopped. For a long moment there was only silence. Then from somewhere near the porch came the faintest creak of wood, as if something had stepped onto it. Then moments later, back off again. After that silence, he couldn't bring himself to look. He lay quivering under the blanket for what seemed like forever, but he heard nothing more that night. The next morning broke grey and heavy, the air thick with the promise of rain. Cain sat at the breakfast table, pale and silent, his cereal long gone soggy in the bowl. Tony moved about the kitchen, humming under her breath, trying to keep the morning calm. Andrew sat across from Cain, scanning the local paper, but when he finally looked up, he saw his son's trembling hands. "Bet you didn't sleep again, did you?" he asked softly. Cain shook his head. "It was back last night." Andrew sighed. "Cain, it was right outside my window." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I heard it, scraping on the glass, like straw and nails. It's moving around the house, Dad. It's not staying in the field anymore." Tony set down her coffee cup. "Honey, it's just your imagination. Maybe a branch—" "There aren't any trees by my window," Cain snapped, eyes wide. "It's real. It's coming closer every night." The room fell quiet. The only sound was the slow tick of the old wall clock and the distant caw of a crow somewhere beyond the fields. Andrew finally folded his paper, pushing it aside. "All right," he said. "Let's take a look. You'll see for yourself, okay? No more nightmares if we face this head-on." Cain nodded shakily, following his father out the back door. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through their shoes as they crossed the yard. The pumpkin field stretched before them, orange and green beneath the morning haze. The scarecrow stood where it should have been, tall, crooked, motionless in the breeze. Andrew made a slow circle around the house, inspecting the ground. Cain stayed close behind, scanning every shadow, every blade of grass. "Nothing," Andrew muttered after a moment. "No footprints, no damage, just dirt." Cain frowned. "It was here, I swear it was. I heard it scraping." Andrew crouched by the edge of the patch, brushing at the soil. "Only marks I see are here, probably raccoons or rabbits digging around. See?" He pointed at a few shallow grooves that ringed the pumpkin patch, faint but long. Cain stared. The lines weren't shaped like paw prints. They were thin, straight, like scratches dragged by something long and narrow. "It's not animals," he whispered. Andrew gave a patient smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Cain, I appreciate your imagination, but there's nothing here. We've got a lot to do today. Let's put this scarecrow talk to rest, all right?" He turned and started back toward the house. Cain lingered, glancing once more at the scarecrow. The wind tugged lightly at its sleeve, making it twitch. Just a trick of the breeze, he told himself, but as he turned to follow his father, he could have sworn the thing's head was tilted, watching them go. That night, the air turned colder. Clouds drifted across the moon, dimming the silver light that usually spilled over the fields. Cain lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his blanket pulled tight around him. He tried to stay still, to not look. He told himself he wouldn't, he couldn't. If he didn't look, it couldn't move. But curiosity, or something darker, pressed against his thoughts like a weight. Slowly, he turned his head toward the window. The field lay still beneath the moonlight. The scarecrow stood at its post, head bowed, arms drooping slightly. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, it wasn't standing where it had been before. Cain's heart skipped. He blinked hard. No, it had to be a trick of the light. But when he looked again, it had moved closer. A few rows in, one arm raised slightly, the hat casting a long, uneven shadow across the vines. He pushed himself up, breath shallow. His eyes burned as he stared, unblinking. Another blink, and now it was closer still. It didn't walk, it didn't crawl, it was just closer every time his eyes moved. Row by row, second by second, the distance between them shrank. Cain whimpered softly, backing against his wall. Then the scarecrow stopped. standing at the very edge of the yard, hat nearly brushing the low branches of the apple tree. He froze, hardly daring to breathe. Then he heard the sound of straw rustling in the wind. He shot under the blanket once again and didn't dare move until dawn broke. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, warm and golden, but Kane looked grey and hollow in its glow. When he stumbled out of his room, Tony caught sight of him and frowned. "Sweetheart," she said, setting down the dish towel, "you look awful." Kane's eyes were rimmed red, his skin pale as milk. "Didn't sleep," he muttered, rubbing at his arms. "It was scratching again last night." Andrew exchanged a look with Tony over Kane's head, that quiet parental look that said enough is enough. "Kane," Andrew said gently, "we've talked about this. You're scaring yourself sick. That scarecrow's not going anywhere." "It's moving around the house," Kane said weakly, voice cracking. "I saw it." Tony came over and pressed a hand to his forehead. Her brow furrowed. "He's burning up, Andrew. He's got a fever." Andrew sighed, his tone softening. "All right, buddy. You're staying in bed today, no arguments. Your mind's just running wild from being overtired." "I'm not making it up," Kane whispered, swaying slightly on his feet. "I know," Tony said, though her voice trembled a little. "But right now you need to rest. You'll feel better soon, I promise." The next few days blurred together. Kane barely left the confinement in his parents' bed. The fever came and went in waves, leaving him drenched in sweat and shivering beneath the covers. Tony kept cold cloths on his forehead and brought him soup he hardly touched. Sometimes, through the haze of fever dreams, he'd see shapes in the corner of the room, long shadows that swayed like figures in the moonlight. At first, Tony thought he was just dreaming, but on the second night she heard him whispering in his sleep. "It's outside," he mumbled, voice faint and trembling. "It's watching me." Tony brushed a hand through his hair, forcing a small smile. "It's just the fever, baby. Nothing's out there." But when she looked toward the window, she found herself pulling the curtain shut a little tighter. By the fourth day, Kane's fever broke. The color came back to his cheeks, his eyes clearer now, though tired and wary. "You're better," Tony said with a relieved smile, setting a tray of oatmeal and tea on his bedside table. "Can I go back to my room tonight?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "If you're sure you're feeling up to it." Kane nodded. He didn't want to admit it, but being in his parents' room made him feel strange, like the Scarecrow knew he wasn't where he should be. That night, after tucking him in, Tony smoothed the blanket across his chest. "No more nightmares," she whispered. Kane smiled faintly, but his eyes drifted toward the window as she left. The curtains were drawn tight, but he could still see the faint silver glow of moonlight around the edges. The house fell quiet. The night pressed in. For the first time in days, he felt almost safe. He didn't look out the window that night, nor the next or the one after, despite the tapping on his window, despite the footsteps on the porch, and for over a week, he never glimpsed the pumpkin patch at all after dark. He was feeling safer than he'd felt since they moved there. But safety on that farm never lasted long. Near a week later, at the stroke of midnight, Kane stirred. His throat was dry, his body heavy with sleep. He turned onto his side and froze. The curtain was moving, just barely, a faint ripple as though something outside was brushing against it. He sat up slowly, his chest tightening. The fever might have passed, but the dread hadn't. His trembling hand reached out slowly for the edge of the curtain and tugged it back just an inch. Moonlight flooded the room, and out in the field, standing in the same spot it always had been, the Scarecrow. Still, silent, but still facing the house. Kane's pulse thudded in his ears. He wanted to look away, he wanted to pretend he hadn't seen it. But then, as the clouds drifted away from the moon, the figure seemed to shift. It wasn't on the post anymore, it was standing beside it. Kane's breath caught in his throat. The breeze stirred, and the faintest rustling reached his ears, like straw whispering softly in the night. He was back. It had seen him now, and it had been waiting for him to wake up. Curtains quickly shut tight and head under the covers. There he remained until morning. A week passed. Cain didn't look out the window anymore. He couldn't. Each night brought whispers and faint creaks, the soft brushing of straw against wood, the tapping of fingernails on glass, or the long sigh of the wind through the vines. But he refused to move, refused to look. He buried himself under the blankets and waited for dawn. When morning came, he'd stare at the sunlight spilling across the floor and tell himself it was all just a dream. That's what his father said, after all. Dreams. Imagination. A boy's mind running wild on a lonely farm. By the time October drew near its end, the pumpkins had ripened large and round, fat orange lanterns glowing in the autumn sun. Andrew decided they were ready for sale. "We'll make a real event out of it," he said, his voice bright with pride. "Pumpkin picking, cider, maybe even pie if your mother's feeling generous." Tony smiled. "I'll make 2. Cain just nodded. Andrew was already planning a harvest festival. "We'll carve a few jack-o'-lanterns to set out by the road," he said, his voice carrying that proud edge that always came before hard work. "Good advertisement." Cain's stomach sank. He hadn't set foot near the field since the night he saw it move. Tony caught the look on his face. "You can help me with the candles inside," she said quickly. But Andrew shook his head. "Boy needs some air. Come on, Cain. It's just pumpkins." The walk out to the patch felt endless. The vines rustled underfoot like whispering snakes. A few crows squawked and lifted off the fence posts as they approached. The scarecrow stood in its usual place, tall, crooked, and eerie, its clothes hanging wet with morning dew. The stitched mouth smiled wide across its burlap face, the single grey button eye glinting dully in the light. Andrew crouched to choose a pumpkin. "See? Nothing to be afraid of." Cain didn't answer. The scarecrow's head seemed lower than before, its chin tilted toward the ground as though listening. He kept his eyes on the dirt as they worked, knife scraping through tough orange skin. The sound made his teeth ache, and every so often the wind would shift and he'd swear he heard straw rustling just behind him. But when he looked, nothing moved. After an hour, Andrew clapped his hands together. "That'll do. We'll make some faces on them tonight. Festival starts tomorrow." They carried the pumpkins back to the porch, leaving the scarecrow behind, standing among the vines like a sentinel watching them go. That night, the kitchen filled with the smell of pumpkin flesh and candle wax. Tony laughed softly as she carved a crooked smile into hers. Andrew's jack-o'-lanterns were neat and traditional, triangular eyes, sharp noses. Cain's was uneven, the knife trembling in his small hand. The face came out warped and frightened-looking. When he lit the candle inside, its flickering grin seemed almost to mimic the scarecrow's own. "Perfect," Andrew said, not noticing Cain's shiver. "Set them on the porch. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." That day, cars began pulling up the long dirt drive. Neighbors, townsfolk, families with laughing children. The air filled with chatter and the scent of hay, cinnamon, and warm pumpkin bread. The Mathews farm came alive with color and sound. Andrew moved through the patch grinning ear to ear, shaking hands, counting cash. "Can't believe the turnout," he said proudly. "Told you this place had potential." Tony manned the stand, handing out cider and baked goods, her face flushed from the praise. Everyone said the pumpkins were perfect, bright, heavy, and shaped just right for carving, but Cain couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every so often he'd glance toward the far end of the patch, where the scarecrow stood. Several visitors had wandered close, pointing, laughing, taking photos beside it. Cain had watched, tense, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But it didn't move, not once. Still, a few people remarked on it as they left. "Creepy-looking thing," one man chuckled. "Did you make that yourself?" another asked Andrew. Andrew laughed. "Came with the place. Guess it keeps the birds off." Cain didn't laugh. The sun sank low. The last car left and the farm fell quiet again. Tony and Andrew counted their earnings at the table, both smiling in the warm kitchen light. "Best haul we've had in years," Andrew said. "We'll do this every fall." But outside, the wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, something sour. That night, the storm came full and hard. Rain hammered the roof in sheets, turning the yard to pools of reflected lightning. Cain lay awake, listening to the hiss of it on the window pane. The jack-o'-lanterns outside flickered fitfully, their faces melting into orange slumps. He told himself not to look, not again, but curiosity has a cruel voice. Slowly he turned his head toward the window and tugged back the curtain. The glass was fogged with steam from his breath, blurring the shapes beyond. He wiped a small circle clear with his sleeve, just enough to see the field. Half the pumpkins were gone, the vines stripped and trampled, and through the blur of rain he saw a figure standing near the broken rose, the Scarecrow. At first he thought it was on its post. Then another flash of lightning cracked the sky, and he realized the post was empty. The Scarecrow was standing on the ground. It moved slowly through the field, head jerking with each step, robotic-like motion, straw hands dragging behind it. Mud clung to its legs, thick and dripping. Lightning flashed again, and now it was closer, halfway to the porch. Cain's breath fogged the glass. He wiped at it again, trembling all over. Chills ran up, then back down his spine. The figure had vanished into the rain. He blinked, heart hammering, then jerked back with a gasp. It was at the window. That burlap face pressed flat against the glass, rain running in rivulets down its stitched grin. Its button eye had come loose, hanging by a thread. Through the torn hole behind it, Cain saw something wet and alive. An eye, red-rimmed and glistening, half-sewn shut. The other eye stared directly at him, dull and cold, a deep, cavernous black hole into its head. The Scarecrow's breath, or maybe just the heat from its body, fogged the pain. The grin twitched. Then it reached up and tapped the glass with long, dirty fingernails. A slow, deliberate rhythm, like it was knocking just for him. Cain froze, the sound vibrating through the window into his bones. Then it pressed its palm flat against the pane, straw and nails scraping together with a squeal that made his stomach twist. That was when he screamed. Tony and Andrew burst in, hearts pounding. "Cain, what happened?" Tony cried, running to him. He pointed at the window, his voice barely a whisper. "It's right there." Andrew turned, but outside only the rain. The glass streaked with water, the field dark and empty. The Scarecrow was gone. Tony wrapped her arms around her shaking son. Andrew stared out into the storm for a long time, jaw tight, eyes searching the darkness. Finally, he closed the curtain and said quietly, "There's nothing out there, Cain. Just the wind." But his voice trembled when he said it, and as the thunder faded into the distance, the faint smell of wet straw lingered in the room. Cain woke late the next morning. The light spilling through his curtains was pale and heavy, the kind of grey that followed long rainstorms. His throat felt dry, his eyes gritty. He barely remembered falling asleep after the terror of the night before. Downstairs he heard voices, his father's low and serious, his mother's worried and thin. When he shuffled into the kitchen, Andrew was standing by the window, coffee cup in hand, staring out toward the pumpkin patch. Tony turned when she saw him. "Morning, sweetheart," she said softly. "You gave us quite a scare last night." Cain didn't answer. His eyes followed his father's gaze out the window. The field was a mess. Deep gouges tore through the soft, rain-soaked soil. Half the fence posts were splattered orange. "What happened?" Cain asked quietly. Andrew set his mug down with a sigh. "Looks like someone had themselves a bit of fun out there last night. Some of the pumpkins got smashed, a few thrown clear over the fence." Cain felt his stomach drop. "You mean someone came here?" "That's what it looks like." Andrew shrugged, though his jaw was tight. "Probably some local kids, or maybe one of the hands from Margot's place. Heard from a few folks yesterday that our pumpkins were the talk of the sale. Bigger, better shaped, sweeter too. Wouldn't surprise me if that ruffled a few feathers." He turned toward Cain, trying for a lighter tone that didn't reach his ears. "That's what you saw last night, son. Not a monster, just some jealous fool sneaking around." But Cain's gaze had drifted past his father, toward the far end of the field. The Scarecrow was there again, perched back on its post, arms spread wide, still watching the house. Only now the head hung lower than before. and its one dangling button eye seemed to catch the sunlight like a warning. "It wasn't kids," Kane whispered. Andrew frowned. "What was that?" "Nothing," he replied. Now wasn't the time. They spent the rest of the day cleaning up. Most of the pumpkins were sold off to the last few customers who'd come for the end of the harvest, but several had begun to rot after the storm, soft, sunken patches, seeping dark juice into the dirt. Flies buzzed thick around them. Kane helped Tony hang paper bats along the porch and string orange lights around the windows. Halloween was only a few days away, and she was determined to make the place look cheerful again. When they finished, Kane stood at the edge of the porch, staring at the scarecrow. The breeze tugged at its tattered sleeve. "Dad?" he said finally. Andrew, crouched beside the steps, hammering a loose board, looked up. "Yeah? Can we take it down now? The scarecrow, I mean." Andrew smiled tiredly. "You still thinking about that? Tell you what, we'll keep it up through Halloween night like a proper autumn decoration, and after the trick-or-treaters are gone," he gave a small grin, "we'll burn it just like a Guy Fawkes doll. How's that?" Kane hesitated. "You promise?" "I promise," he laughed. "Now no more nightmares until the big fire, okay?" Kane nodded and smiled, then trotted off back into the house. That night the air was colder. The moon hung pale behind thin clouds, turning the farm silver-grey. Kane was sat in his bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying not to think about the field, about the scarecrow's crooked grin, the faint sound of straw brushing glass. Then, thud. Something hit the side of the house. He froze. The noise came again, louder this time, then another, and a wet, heavy splat against his window. Heart pounding, he pushed the covers back and crept toward the sound. The curtain was half open, the glass streaked with something dark. He reached out with shaking fingers and wiped a small patch clean. Pumpkin pulp. Seeds and orange flesh were smeared across the glass like blood. Kane stumbled back, knocking over his lamp. His shout brought his parents running. "What happened?" Tony gasped, seeing the mess. Andrew's face hardened. He threw on his coat and stepped out onto the porch with a flashlight. The beam cut through the night, glinting off smashed pumpkins strewn across the side of the house, dripping from the windowsills. "Damn kids," he muttered, his voice low and angry. "They think this is funny?" He shone the light across the yard, the broken fence, the scattered remains of their harvest, but there was no movement, no sound, except the whispering wind. The scarecrow stood motionless at the edge of the field, watching. Tony rubbed Kane's shoulder. "It's all right, honey, it's just a prank, we'll get it cleaned up." But Kane couldn't look away from that dark shape in the distance. He didn't need to see it move to know it had. The next morning, Andrew made a call to the sheriff's office. They promised to send someone by later to take a report. Tony tried to make light of it, humming as she made breakfast, pretending not to notice the way her husband kept glancing out the window. But Kane saw everything. He saw the worry tightening the corners of her eyes. He saw the pale set of Andrew's jaw. And most of all, he saw the scarecrow, still there, still standing. The loose button eye now hanging lower, almost torn free, its grin splitting wider in the daylight. Halloween was only 2 nights away. He couldn't wait to set it alight, but deep down, Kane knew that burning it might already be too late. By mid-morning, the sheriff's cruiser rumbled up the drive, tires crunching through puddles. 2 officers stepped out, Sheriff Miller, a broad man with a trimmed beard, and his deputy, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a notepad already in hand. Andrew met them on the porch, the smell of wet soil and rotting pumpkin thick in the air. "Appreciate you coming out," he said. "We had some vandals overnight, threw pumpkins all over the side of the house, messed up part of the fence." Miller nodded, scanning the yard. "Looks like a mess, all right." They walked the property together while Tony watched from the kitchen window, and Kane stood silently at the door. The field was a churn of orange and brown, pumpkin flesh scattered like bits of meat. The scarecrow still stood in its usual place, head drooping, sleeve fluttering in the breeze. The deputy crouched near the fence, pressing a finger into the mud. "No shoe prints," she murmured. Just smears. Too soft to tell anything. Miller straightened with a sigh. Storm washed away most of the evidence. Nothing we can do with this kind of muck. We'll keep an eye out, but it's probably kids. You know how it is this time of year. Andrew forced a polite smile. Sure, kids. The officers took a few photos, jotted some notes, and promised to patrol the road that night before heading back down the drive. Their taillights vanished into the grey mist. When they were gone, the farm felt emptier than before. The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. Andrew and Tony went about their chores, pretending the morning hadn't happened, while Kane stayed close to the house, never letting the field out of his sight. By sunset, a cold wind had risen, rattling the loose boards on the porch and sighing through the corn stubble. Dinner was quiet. Andrew spoke only once, saying, "We'll burn that thing tomorrow night. Halloween's as good a time as any to get rid of bad luck." Kane nodded, clutching his spoon. He just hoped it worked. That night, the house groaned in the wind. The jack-o'-lanterns on the porch had burned down to stubs, their carved smiles melted into grimaces. Kane lay awake, playing with his trucks, trying to forget that thing was still out there. He put them aside and climbed into bed, listening to the wind rattling his window pane. Then he realized something. The field was dark, much darker than usual, no shape standing in the distance. The scarecrow was gone. He sat up, heart hammering, and turned toward the window. The moonlight shimmered off the wet grass. The post where the scarecrow had stood was empty. Then came the sound. Thump, thump, then scrape. Something was brushing along the side wall of the house, slow and deliberate. Kane's breath caught. A shadow slid across the curtains, tall, hunched and wrong, with a pointy hat. He ducked under the blanket, clutching it tight around his face. His whole body trembled in fear. It was moving around as it pleased now. Then knock, 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 3 slow raps at the window. He almost jumped out of his skin and had to bite down on a sob, squeezing his eyes shut. The house creaked, the wind moaned, and then silence. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Finally, trembling, he pulled the blanket back from his face and looked through a slim gap in the curtains. He couldn't see anything there. He reached for the curtain with shaking fingers. Just a peek, he told himself, just a little. He pulled across the curtain ever so slightly, and there it was. The scarecrow stood pressed against the window, so close he could see the seams in its burlap skin. One arm rested on the glass, straw fingers splayed. The button eye that had once hung loose was gone entirely, and in its place was that other eye, the human one, blood-rimmed and glistening, staring straight into him. The other eye, the gaping hole, was the same, like an abyss of despair. Its grin was wider now, stitches split at the corners, rain-darkened straw showing through. Its human eye twitched wildly, as if frantically searching for something. Kane's scream tore through the room before he even knew he'd made it. He jumped back, sliding off the bed onto the floor with a thud. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Andrew burst in, followed by Tony, both half asleep and panicked. "Kane, what is it? What's going on, son?" He pointed at the window, trembling, unable to speak. Andrew threw the curtain open. Nothing. Only the night, the fog, and the faint glimmer of the wet grass. "It was there," Kane sobbed. "Right there." Tony pulled him into her arms. Andrew's face was pale, eyes darting toward the field. "Enough," he said quietly after a long moment. "You're sleeping with us tonight." Kane didn't argue. He clung to his mother's hand all the way to their room and curled between them beneath the heavy quilt. Andrew rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's all right, son," he murmured. "Tomorrow's Halloween. We'll burn that damn thing and be done with it." Kane nodded, though his eyes stayed open long after the house fell still. Outside, somewhere in the dark, the wind carried the faint rustle of straw. Morning came grey and cold, a thin fog rolling low across the fields. The farm was quiet, the wet grass glistening under the weak October sun. Tony cooked pancakes while Andrew checked the property one last time. The scarecrow was still there, slumped on its post like a corpse too stubborn to fall. Its burlap face was darkened with rain, the stitches drawn tight in a permanent grin. When Andrew came back inside, he said only, "Tonight. We end this tonight." Cain didn't argue. The day passed in uneasy normality. The Mathews loaded into the truck and drove into town for the small Halloween festival. It should have been cheerful. Carved pumpkins lining the sidewalks, children in costumes darting between stalls, the smell of caramel and cider in the air. But none of them could quite shake the heaviness that clung to them. Cain stayed close to his parents, flinching at every scarecrow decoration they passed. Tony tried to smile and keep things light, but she jumped when a costumed actor brushed past her, straw spilling from his sleeves. By sundown, they'd had enough. They drove home in silence, headlights cutting through the rising mist. Drizzle began tapping on the windscreen as they pulled onto their long dirt drive. Back at the farmhouse, the porch lights were on and a bowl of candy sat by the door. Cain and his mum took turns to answer the doorbell and hand out candy. This was the best part of the night for him. The few last trick-or-treaters came and went, their laughter echoing down the dark road. By 10 o'clock the knocks had stopped, the night gone still. Andrew closed the door, bolting it. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's finish this." He took a gas can from the shed, his face set in hard determination. Cain followed reluctantly, Tony behind them holding a flashlight. The field was slick with dew. The moon was veiled by clouds, throwing the world into a dim silver haze. The scarecrow stood exactly where it always had, arms outstretched, head drooped, the long sleeves shivering in the wind. For a moment no one spoke. Then Andrew muttered, "Good riddance," and began to douse it with fuel. Cain stood close to his mother, every muscle tight. The smell of gasoline bit the air. Andrew turned to reach for his lighter, and behind him the scarecrow's head lifted. Cain's breath hitched. "Dad!" Andrew spun, but the head had fallen limp again, the wind stirring its sleeve. He looked up at Tony, but she just shook her head. She hadn't seen it move. "Just the breeze," he said under his breath, though his voice wasn't steady. He flicked the lighter once and then a second time. A small flame trembled in the dark. The wind rose up as if in defense. Rain began to patter against the leaves. "Come on," Tony urged. "Do it quick before it starts pouring down." Andrew stepped forward and touched the flame to the soaked hem of the scarecrow's coat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the fire caught, orange licking up the straw-stuffed body, spreading fast across its chest. The smell was awful, burning burlap and wet hay. And then it screamed. The sound tore through the field, high, ragged, almost human. The scarecrow's head snapped back with an eerie jerk, its mouth splitting at the seams, red-rimmed, bloodshot eyes glaring through the smoke. Tony stumbled back, flashlight shaking. "Andrew, what's happening?" He froze, lighter still clutched in his hand. It's just the fire catching wrong. The fuel." It thrashed on the post, flames writhing up its arms, and then with a crack it broke free of its post. Tony shrieked and stumbled back. The burning figure crashed to the ground and lurched upright, staggering through the rows, fire streaming from its sleeves. It howled again, voice breaking into wet sobs and crackling straw. Andrew swore and stumbled back in horror. "It's not possible, it's not," he stammered, slipping to one knee in the mud. Cain didn't move a muscle. He'd seen it move before, but not like this. Rain poured harder, hissing against the flames. The creature spun, arms thrashing, pieces of itself falling away like glowing embers. Finally, with one last shriek, it collapsed into the mud. The thing crawled towards them, clawing at the wet earth with nail and straw to pull itself on. Smoke billowing up into the air, until its arms burnt away. Then it fell, face down, and went still. The rain drowned the flames, sizzling embers away. Then silence. For a long time, none of them moved. Then Andrew approached slowly, shovel in hand, nudging the blackened shape with his boot. It didn't move. Only a half-burned burlap shell, straw soaked and limp in the mud. "Jesus Christ," Tony whispered. Did that thing scream?" Andrew swallowed hard. Sounded like gas, exploding pockets of air probably, that's all. It wasn't alive. But it moved, Andrew. You saw... I didn't see anything, he said too quickly. It fell when the post broke, that's all. Cain stared at the smoking remains, eyes wide and unblinking. It was alive, he whispered. Andrew turned sharply. That's enough, Cain. It's over. We're done with this. He set the shovel down and took Tony's hand. Let's go inside. They locked every door that night. Andrew double-bolted the back door and drew the curtains tight. Tony sat with Cain on the couch until he fell asleep, whispering, "It's over. It's gone." Outside, the rain came down in sheets, drowning the last wisps of smoke. When dawn came, the storm had passed. Mist rolled through the fields like fresh breath. Andrew was the first to step outside, shovel still in hand, to bury what was left of the scarecrow. Tony and Cain followed silently. The field was quiet. The post stood broken, half buried in mud, but the blackened scarecrow was gone. No ash, no straw, nothing but a dark circle of earth and two long furrows stretching away into the fog, as though something had crawled off on its hands and knees. Andrew stared for a long time, his face pale. Probably the rain washed it out, he said weakly, or animals dragged it off. But Tony didn't answer. She was staring down at the dirt, at the faint prints that weren't quite human, and Cain, standing between them, whispered what neither of them dared to say aloud. "It's not gone." The days that followed were strangely calm. The Mathews went on with life, as if the night of fire and screams had never happened. The police report about the vandalism sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. Andrew replaced the broken fence posts and turned the scorched earth of the pumpkin patch under, determined to erase it from memory. But the land had other plans. It began with the birds. The first raven came 3 days after the fire, a black shape circling above the empty field. Then 2 more. By the end of the week, there were dozens, perching along the fence rails and the crooked remains of the scarecrow's post. They didn't caw or scatter when Andrew walked out there. They just watched, silent, still. Cain hated it. "They're waiting for it," he said once, voice small. Andrew ruffled his hair, trying to smile. "They're just birds, bud. Nothing's waiting for anything." But even he didn't like how they stayed through the night, lining the fence like a row of sentries. Their eyes caught the porch light and glowed faintly red. Winter came, cold and sharp. The ravens never left. They sat in the snow, black against the white field. When the wind blew, their feathers shimmered like oil, their eyes following the farmhouse windows. Tony stopped opening the curtains after that. "Creeps me out," she muttered once. "Feels like they're waiting for something to move." Andrew told her it was nonsense, but he avoided the field now too. He focused on the barn, the chickens, the equipment, anything but that patch of cursed soil. By the following spring, Andrew decided to try again. The pumpkins were gone, the scarecrow burned, and the field had lain fallow all winter. He plowed the earth fresh, scattered corn and barley seed, and prayed the season would wash the memory of that night away. But the ravens were waiting. They came in flocks this time, dark clouds descending as soon as the seeds hit the ground. They tore at the soil, pecking up every kernel, leaving only churned earth and feathers. Andrew ran out shouting, waving his hat, firing a shot into the air. But they only lifted a few feet, circled once and settled again, unbothered. That night, Tony found him sitting on the porch, staring out at the field. "Maybe we should let it go," she said softly. "That land, it doesn't want us out there anymore." Andrew didn't answer. He just nodded once and stared into the dark. The next year he tried again. He planted earlier, built fences, hung nets, even put up another scarecrow just to test his own fears. But the ravens came anyway. They didn't fear the new scarecrow. They used it. Dozens of them perched on its arms, its shoulders, its head. Their weight bent the pole, straw falling loose until the figure slumped forward, broken again. Cain refused to go anywhere near it. By midsummer, nothing grew. The soil was barren, stripped bare. After 2 years of trying, Andrew finally gave up. He left it alone and concentrated on the rest of the land, fenced the field off completely, and let the grass grow wild. From then on, the ravens stayed. Through the seasons, they came and went, but there were always a few, black silhouettes shifting across the fence line, feathers catching the light, eyes glinting toward the house. Even in winter, when the snow lay thick and silent, their shadows crossed the white ground like stains that would never fade. And sometimes, when the moon rose full over the farm, Cain would wake in the night and swear he could hear it. A low, crackling sound, like straw rubbing against glass. The morning was clear and cool, the air touched with that dry golden light of early autumn. The farmhouse looked smaller than Cain remembered, weathered around the edges, paint peeling where the wind had chewed at it through the years. He stood by the truck, loading the last of his bags into the back seat. His friend Milo leaned against the hood, engine idling, a faint smile on his face. "You sure you're ready for city life, farm boy?" Milo teased. Cain laughed softly, though his eyes were distant. "Yeah, guess it's about time." He was off to university in the big city. It was far from the farm, but maybe that's what he needed. Tony came down the steps, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes already glistening. "You call when you get there. Every few days, you hear me?" "I will, Mom." Andrew stood beside her, arms crossed, doing his best to look stern and steady. "And don't drive like a fool. Keep up with your studies." "I'll be fine, Dad." Cain smiled, hugging them both. The scent of the house, the sound of the wind through the fields, all of it felt heavier than usual, like the place itself didn't want to let go. He climbed into the passenger seat, rolled down the window and waved. The car began to pull away, gravel crunching under the tires. His parents stood in the driveway, waving back, faces small and proud in the rearview mirror. Behind them, the house glowed faintly in the morning sun, the field stretching wide and still. For a moment, Cain felt something like peace. He turned his head for one last look and froze. Beyond the fence in the old pumpkin field they'd long given up on, something was standing. At first he thought it was just his memory playing tricks on him, a dark shape in the mist, tall and slouched. But then the breeze shifted, and he saw it clearly. A scarecrow. Its clothes were the same tattered black coat. Its hat hung low over a burlap face, seams crudely stitched, one button missing, and where the button should have been, an eye gleamed, pale and sharp, catching the light like glass. A dozen ravens perched along its arms and shoulders, feathers rippling, their black forms stark against the grey field. Then, slowly, almost casually, the scarecrow lifted one arm and waved. A low ripple of movement ran through the ravens. Some took flight, circling above it in dark spirals. Cain's breath caught. He twisted in his seat to look closer, but the car had already turned down the long dirt road, the figure swallowed by distance and dust. He told himself it couldn't be. It had burned. He'd seen it crumble. Still, as the farmhouse disappeared from view, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching him go, that it always had been. And in the field, under the wide October sky, the scarecrow stood motionless once more. Its coat fluttered in the wind, straw whispering faintly, the ravens settling back onto its arms. As Cain's parents went back inside, closing the door unaware, the last echoes of the car fading into silence, the scarecrow's head turned slowly towards the house, its stitched mouth twitching at the seams. Thank you for watching the story. I hope you will show your support to the channel. It's new, so it would greatly benefit from your help. Simply hit the like button, subscribe, or even drop a comment. It all helps, and it's all appreciated. Once again, thank you, and have a great evening.